Dr. Johnstone works to help 2- and 4-year colleges create structures and processes to increase student completion, learning, and labor market outcomes. His unique and engaging approach to inquiry and improvement fuses the world of foundations, initiatives, and system-level policy changes with the ground-level work of college practitioners and college senior leaders. He has worked on ground with over 350 colleges around the country, both directly and on initiatives such as the AACC Pathways Institute, the Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence, the California Guided Pathway Initiative, Jobs for Future Work with 15 centers in the National Student Success Center Network, Gates Completion by Design, Lumina's Beyond Financial Aid, and a variety of state and local level projects. He has served as a director, dean, and provost in the California Community College system for over a decade and worked to bring strategic consultants in industry prior to shifting to higher education. He brings a unique dual perspective with over 20 years of consulting experience in industry and higher education, and brings an energy and passion for authentic change to improve outcomes. His newest endeavor with NCII is the creation and preparation for the first cohort in fall 2017 of the Agency Attitude and Intensive Implementation Model, where NCII will work deeply on the ground with 15 colleges per year on 2 strategic to implementation timeline on guided pathways and financial stability reform. So without further ado.
It's a long bio. God, who wrote that thing? That thing's awful. Thank you. Hey, it's good to be here. I'm happy I'm going to have a chance to chat with you over the next 90 minutes. We are going to have conversations. This will be, I kind of go through a little bit of a soliloquy at the start, then we're going to have a lot of interactivity. And I do build in a brief period where I get to play a game show host, so we'll be pretty interactive at that point. It's Friday, you got to mix things up a little. So I am at the end of, you heard I travel a lot. I was that last year in 2016, I did, is it 17 still? Yeah. 250,000 air miles all within the U.S. I was in 93 cities last year. I'm constantly on the road. I'm at the end of a 8-day stretch where last Thursday I was in Utica, New York. And then on Monday I was in Syracuse, which sounds good, except for I went to one of my homes in California on the weekend, then came back to Syracuse Monday. Was in Syracuse on Tuesday at community college, flew to Vegas to catch the end of the trustees conference with a presentation yesterday morning, and came to Detroit last night, drove down here, and I'm going to my other house in Connecticut tonight. By the way, it sounds very like upper crusty that I have houses in California and Connecticut, but it's nowhere near that. It's like when you get remarried, my suggestion if that happens is to marry someone close to you. Marrying someone in 3,000 miles away, just logistically complicated. But no, we'll have some fun today. And it's just to tell you why I'm here is you heard a bunch of the places. I've had the opportunity to work over the last 7 years around the country on a wide variety of projects, but really in the last 6 years, it's kind of at the heart and the beginning of the Guided Pathways movement. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm actually not going to talk much about Guided Pathways in the first 45 minutes of the presentation. We're going to work up to that. But I worked on things like Completion by Design, which of course was was the original Guided Pathways project in the country. You go back into the late 2000s, there's some our friends at CCRC, the Community College Research Center, Davis Jenkins, Tom Bailey, Judith Scott Clayton, had been doing a lot of research on why our students struggle, right? And they started kind of, integrating what we heard from students. When you look at the data, when you look at research in behavioral economics, in my field, social psychology, we find out a lot of the reasons why students struggle. This is another backdrop to this, is we're using a model of higher education, the university model, that's about 700 years old, right? And it was a model that worked really well when we put it together 700 years ago, whether you think of it as the monasteries or Oxford or Edinburgh, arguments abound there. The model, who went to university then? Demographically, the offspring of the ruling elite, right? And by the way, the model worked really well if you have unlimited time and unlimited resources. By the way, it still does. Fast forward 700 years and we have a model that the data shows us works incredibly well if you are wealthy and have unlimited time and unlimited resources. The problem is, in the mid-20th century, we made some changes in America, as we tend to do. We democratized higher education, right? How do we do that mainly? Mid-20th century. Single biggest factor, GI Bill. We put in the GI Bill in the mid-20th century, which caused community. Well, when did Owens start? 1955 to 1970, over 2/3 of the community colleges in this country started. Why? Because we didn't have space for all these people we opened the doors to, right, as we democratized higher education. So the point, though, is when we put all the community colleges and we put the GI Bill in place, we didn't change the model any. And what we found from the late 60s to maybe 2005, and for a long time there, we just ran the model and kind of figured it works or it doesn't work. And somewhere in the early 2000s, and you can look to a lot of reasons for this, accountability, accreditation, data systems becoming available, achieving the dream, any of these reasons, all valid. We started looking at the data a little more closely and going, wait a minute, we got a kind of a problem here. If we look at the percentage of students who come in first time to us and then look at the completion of those students, and not all students are trying to complete, we understand that, there's maybe 10 or 15% who aren't. But for the rest of the students, you look at their completion rate, and we find that if you count certificates of 1 year or more, 2-year degrees, and or transfer, you can count any of those three things, we tend to see most community colleges in this country have between a 30 and 40% completion rate. Okay, well that's not high, right? It's also, we're going to talk in a minute about some 4-year schools. So we started looking at what, some of the ideas of why that was, and I think that's really led us to some of the big ideas of guided pathways. And I will talk more about them as we get into it. But I think one thing that's interesting about the guided pathways movement, 2011 completion by design starts. It started in 4 states. Gates put $60 million into completion by design. Not all of that money, of course, went to the colleges. After the first year, we were down to 3 states. There was a planning year, and Texas moved off to do their own thing, as they often do. And we had 3 colleges from Ohio, as you may know, Lorraine, Stark, and now, of course, Sinclair. I'm like, Jesus, the big one in Dayton that I've been to 14 times. And you travel this much. I'm very happy when I don't say, really happy to be here in Chicago, than when I'm in Perrysburg, Ohio. If I get that right, I'm usually in good shape. But we had the 3 colleges in Ohio. We had Miami-Dade in Florida, the largest community college in the country with 100,000 students. And we had 5 colleges in North Carolina. So that was back in 2011. Now that project ran. It's actually, the final event on it is Monday and Tuesday in Atlanta to kind of close it and celebrate it. But if you follow the movement forward of guided pathways, you get to 2015 where nationally Gates funded another project. So the colleges got money back in 2011. In 2015, AACC is now involved. So the original project had folks like CCRC, my organization, the RP group, now the NCII. It had Jobs for the Future. It had Public Agenda. And when we fast forward to 2015, now the other big organizations are involved and get used as a sign that the movement's going somewhere. Now you have Achieving the Dream. You have the Aspen Institute. You have the American Association of Community Colleges, which is basically your trade organization in DC, right? Kind of trying to fight for community colleges, which in 2013 put out a really interesting report. It's called the 21st Century Learning Commission Report. It's actually kind of interesting because what it said was community colleges over the last couple of decades have been doing really hard work with the lowest resources and have been doing as good of a job as possible under the conditions we have. But we need to fundamentally change how we structure our approaches and programs and policies so that more students complete. That's kind of a bold statement from your own organization fighting for you in DC to say, we got to rethink this. What did they basically say? Got to rethink DevEd, you got to rethink guided pathways, we have to rethink a number of the ways we do things. And that, I think, was a huge piece of the movement. So that within 2015, when AACC is running a national project, here's the value proposition now. Colleges got about $1 million to $2 million each to be part of CBD. And of course, that was partially because we had no thought capital. We frankly were all kind of trying to fly the ship as we were building it or whatever. That's really like 3 analogies mixed into one, by the way. That's mixed metaphors. But it was a little ugly early on in CBD because we were just trying to figure this out together, where our great friends in Ohio and North Carolina, Texas, and Florida helped us. But in 2015, we opened a door to a project where colleges had to apply. They had to say they're going to fully implement guided pathways for all entering new students in fall of 2018. 3-year cycle, which we think is very aggressive to do the type of work we're talking about. And they would get no money from Gates and pay their way for a team of 5 to 7 people to 6 institutes nationally, at every institute also including the CEO who had to attend. So when you run up the math on the travel costs for 5 to 7 people to go 6 times around the country, you start hitting like $50,000, $60,000 with no money going to the college to cover that. right? So we had no idea if people were going to show up or even apply to this thing. And almost immediately, we had 200 colleges after we opened it up say we want to do this. And we ended up picking 30, including a couple from Ohio. This is my test this morning on like day 7 of this travel. Who are the Ohio colleges in the project? We have Columbus State, we have Zane, and we have one more. And I really should remember it because Institute number 6 is coming up. I will at some point remember it or like shout it out, the third college. I really should know. Oh, see, I did that. Tri-C is also in the project as well. Whew, got there. This, by the way, I added it up this morning, 10,000 miles, including 1,000 miles of driving in the last 8 days. So I apologize for whatever comes out of this mouth today. It's going to be ugly, but hopefully fun. So when we opened up the door, we ended up picking 30 colleges from 17 states, and we've really seen this movement grow. We've created a lot of thought capital and materials. And getting to why I'm here, which means this is going to be like a 9-hour presentation. This is all like, why am I here? Geez, this is going to be ugly. Jobs for the Future was one of the organizations on original CBD. They're involved in the ACT Pathways Project. They have helped start and support student success centers around the country, of which Ohio was one of the first. I think I was actually one of the first 3 back in 2011. Laura Rittner is the current head of the Student Success Center in Ohio. Some great statewide events, and through some funding that JFF has from Gates, I'm able to come to do events like this, a couple of them per state, and so that's why I'm here. So thanks go to Laura, my good friend Laura Rittner, and the Student Success Center. So now maybe I can get off the title slide. Anyone ready for that? Boy, this is going to be a good day, I can tell you. All right, we're gonna get it back together. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do 3 things. I guess I should have added the 4th thing, which is when I ramble for 10 minutes at the start. All right, we're done with the rambling. You're like, yeah, sure, you're done with the rambling. Okay. We're going to talk about a story of hope. You might wonder why I'm about to tell you a story about Georgia State University, which is a 4-year school. Hold on a second, I'll give you a pretty good reason why. We're also going to talk a little bit about building some urgency in the case for change. I said earlier that most community colleges have about a 35% completion rate. To do any of the type of scaled work we're talking about fundamentally changing the system, you got to have a pretty solid case for change. And we're going to talk about not only the fact that 2 out of our 3 students who come to us don't succeed, which I think is, for me, is enough of a reason, but also that we have a much sharper sense of urgency around our role with economic mobility. And we're going to talk about economic mobility for a second. Some data that maybe suggests we may not have signed on for this mission of economic mobility, but if you're a low-income citizen in this country and you're going to go through higher education, you're going to pretty much, all odds, have a significant effect from the community college on you. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the second bullet. And then the third one, we're going to actually this is where we're going to play a little bit of the game show, and I'll talk a little bit more about guided pathways then, and we'll kind of go through things. All right, so why would I talk about Georgia State? So one of the many myths of higher education is that all 4-year schools have good completion rates and all 2-year schools don't. Well, in most states, and Ohio is one of them, you have a flagship university, right? You have the flagship 4-year public who's highly selective, takes the top 3 to 7% of the high school graduating class, and probably without doing anything differently, has very high completion rates. Anyone know what Ohio State's graduation rate is, 6-year graduation rate? My guess is it's in the 80s, the high 70s, somewhere around there. I get myself in trouble sometimes when I'm in places like Ohio, because I think what I often will say at this point is, well, you have the elite public flagships, and I'm not going to do what I usually do, which is say, like Michigan. Yeah, say we got a couple of 2 claps and 38 boos. I see how this goes. Who are highly selective both within and outside. You'll see like a 92% graduation rate at Michigan. So it's places like Virginia, Michigan, UC Berkeley, who are kind of the top in terms of selectivity for the public. So you'll find graduation rates up into the low 90s, okay, which is awesome, right? Then again, you have to ask the question, how much do they have to do to get those graduation rates when you're taking the top 3 to 5%? So in most states, you have a second flagship under the kind of top flagship, and I don't know who that is in Ohio. Who's like the next school that in terms of selectivity below Ohio State? Public. Miami? And I always forget that Miami, Ohio is public. So there's a second flagship in most states. In states like Michigan, Michigan State would be the next one. And by the way, usually if I'm in that state, people who went to the second flagship, now they're bad at me because I called them the second flagship. But who's slightly less selective, right? And they tend to have graduation rates in the 60s and 70s. And then you get to all the regionals, right? The schools that, I'm a sports guy, that when the tournament comes around, we call the directional schools. Central Michigan, Western Michigan, Southeast Louisiana. By the way, perfectly good institutions, but they're not as selective, right? They take the top 25 or 33% of the high school graduating class. And their graduation rates, though, start dropping. They start dropping into the 50s and 40s, and occasionally the 30s and 20s, which is not something that a lot of people know. I guarantee you in Ohio there's a couple regionals who have graduation rates in the 30s. You probably know who they are. They're not bad places. That's not the point here, right? These are good people doing good work. But with the old system, what we're learning is the old system doesn't work for the student populations who end up going to these schools, right? This is why the story of Georgia State is so relevant to us in the community college sector. Why? Anyone from Georgia? The well-known Georgia to Northwest Ohio train. So this is downtown Atlanta. This is Georgia State University. It's in downtown Atlanta. It's an urban regional four-year. And if you go back into the early, let's go back. There we are. If you go back into the early 2000s, this is a college with a 31% graduation rate, right? So this is not that unusual. It's certainly not the lowest. There are some in the teens, by the way, for regional urban four-years. And these students are very much like ours. You look at the average SAT scores of a student entering Georgia State. They were not that much different than our students. Probably slightly higher, but not that much different. So their story, though, they had a graduation rate of 31%, and so this is maybe the most important part of their story, all the way back in 2002 and 2003. It happened with a new president and new provost, but that doesn't have to be in place. They said when they looked at this data, this is not okay. It's actually not okay that 7 out of the 10 students who start at Georgia State University do not complete. Who does Georgia State University serve disproportionately? Low-income students and students of color. All right, so the very students we need higher education to be that economic bridge for are the ones who are in the system that's failing them the most, right? We can learn a lot from this in the community college sector, of course. But this is a really important point. If you're going to do fundamental scale change, if Guiding Pathways is not going to be the next educational fad that you get a grant for, that you put someone in a trailer at the back of the campus who's working on that grant, right? You guys are, see, I always know where that's actually happened. That's a good model no matter if it's happened, but I know where it's actually happened when I say that. And by the way, I used to work in a trailer at the back of a campus in California, so I know how this goes. If it's not going to be that, which means whoever you stick in that trailer, she or he has no chance of scaled institutional change if we've physically walled them off in a trailer at the back of the campus, much less organizationally, right? If this is not going to be that, we have to have a pretty good call for why we're going to take this to another level. And I think when you say something like, all right, 3 out of 10 students completing is not okay, it's a pretty important start. So what did they do next? They started looking at some data. I like that. I'm an old IR guy from California in the early days. And so they started looking at data, and they looked at what we all look at when we look at data, because graduation rate takes too long to measure. We all hate waiting 6 years. Fall to fall retention school, right? We can see, hey, what happened with the fall 16 students? We can go to fall 17. It's a very good metric in terms of being able to measure it within a year. It's also my least favorite metric in higher education. It's important to know, I guess, how many students are here fall to fall, but it doesn't tell you anything about how they're doing. But let's look at it anyway, because we always look at it. Georgia State did. And this is the problem with fall to fall retention. I'm failing miserably at the, we're going to do this now. Look. This is what fall to fall retention looks like over a 10-year period. Now, it's higher at Georgia State than it would be for a community college because they're a four-year school, right? So it's going to be higher. Where would you be at a community college? I know where you probably are. About 57 to 63% the average fall to fall retention for most community colleges. About right here, too, somewhere in the high 50s. Anyone know? She says, we got one person who's nodding. So if I nod, he'll just move on. Yeah, that's good. It's not my first rodeo, I understand. So I feel got called for that. Now, so yeah, ours would probably, let's say it's around 60%. The thing is, it's not going to move that much over. The point of this metric is not that it's high or low, it's that it doesn't tend to move very much. Now, smaller to mid-sized community colleges, what's the fall head count at Owens? 9,000. So you're more of a solid mid-size, even mid to upper if you look across the country. In California, it would be mid to lower, but you're a solid mid-sized college. So yours probably doesn't move as much with the economy as someone like, remind me where I went west of here in the fields. What's the next community college over? Northwest, yeah, which is much smaller, right? So they're going to get more rural. They're going to get more regional variation around the economy. You're not in the fields. you're in the, that's a, look, we're going to get pretty philosophical. We all started in a field. I mean, we just put buildings above it. I mean, yeah, here, it's good. No, but smaller rural colleges are going to see bumps in retention because when the economy gets bad, you get more students, it gets better. You see that a little at mid-sized to larger colleges, but it doesn't have as big of an effect, right? Now, you guys are probably down enrollment in the last couple of years. That's a whole different thing. We'll talk about being down in enrollment in a second. So you look at this and you go, well, this doesn't help us very much, right? It's not really moving. Although it is interesting on one front, which is, wait a minute, we got 80% of our students here after the first year, but only 30% are graduating. So there's another myth of higher education shot, which is the first year is by far the most important and the only thing that matters. Well, apparently not, because they got 8 out of 10 students through the first year, but only 3 out of 10 completed. Now, that doesn't mean the first year is not important. I love first year experience programs and all things that help shape an experience in the first year. The point here is you can't only do that, and it can't be devoid of support after the first year, and I'd argue it also has to be kind of focused on some other things. You know as well as I do that if someone's trying to transfer to Ohio State versus Miami of Ohio, what's your closest regional out here? Toledo? To Toledo in psychology, there's 3 different course paths that they have to achieve junior standing in a major. Because transfer is great, but it's actually not what we're looking for. Transfer with junior standing in a major is what we're looking for so that students don't have to repeat courses. So this middle group of students, they need help, right? They need help trying to figure out where they want to go and what they want to go in. And you know, we like to say they're undecided. One thing I always ask back is, what have we done to help them decide anything? Right? How long do you get with them before, let's say when they come in August, how long would you get with a new student? 15 minutes. So in 15, even if it was 30, that'd be cool. 15 to 30 minutes, we're supposed to talk to them about their hopes and dreams, their academic history to hear, what interests them, how to match them to career, how they did on the placement test, what their GPA was in high school. It's a physically impossible task, right? And then we wonder why so many of them are undecided. I don't know, what else did we give them? Oh, the catalog and a website that is basically repeating the catalog. So when you're bored sometime, take your catalog out and open it to the page that starts listing your programs and read it straight through the page that stops listing your programs. And then reflect on how useful that is as a choice architecture. It's not. It in fact makes it worse, right? It's not designed for that purpose, by the way. It's actually designed as a legal document to establish catalog rights. But what do students have aside from the 15 minutes with an advisor? They have the catalog, right? So it's not surprising they're undecided. We actually can change some things on this, which we'll talk about. But the final group of students that I meet in the service industry in bars says my favorite thing, and this happens at least 1 in 3 times. I'm just taking some classes. That's what I'm doing at Owens. I'm just taking some classes. You guys are nodding because you've heard the same thing, right? Well, what are you taking classes in? What are you trying to do? I don't know. I'm just taking some classes. So here's a student who has very little tie to your college. From an engagement standpoint, they're not sure why they're here. They don't know what they're doing. And it's really easy to leave, and it's really easy to take part-time classes. You don't know what you're doing. Why would you make the emotional, financial, and intellectual and time investment to go full-time if you don't know what you're going full-time in? We have a value proposition problem, is what I would term this as an industry strategic consultant. You have a very unclear value proposition to many of your students. And this, by the way, value proposition does not mean I'm going to make $28,000 6 months from now after a welding certificate or a 2-year degree in radiation therapy is going to give me a $63,000 a year. That's not the only value proposition. Transferring someone to the University of Toledo in business with junior standing in a major is a clear value proposition. Talk to your friend. I know we don't like hearing examples from our own state sometimes of things that national experts say are good. I know how that is from California. But look at what Lorraine's done to tie things into their local community and make really strong value proposition arguments to their students of all those 3+1 programs they have. If you guys haven't seen that slide, they have a slide they use in their community that shows the cost of doing 4 years of the program at the 4-year school, including at Case Western, and then the 3+1 program, and then the last column is the savings. Guaranteed 3+1 program saves you $80,000. Now that's a clear value proposition about a transfer program. I mean, it's very specific in 3+1 programs. The point here is, in most of those students' mind who are saying, I'm just taking some classes, they have no idea why they're here. So it's very easy to go part-time and it's very easy to leave us. I'll use this analogy later, but it's easy to break up with us. We've made it very easy to break up with us, right? And by the way, when we ask students afterwards, why did they break up with us? Why did they leave the college? They always say, this should be familiar to some of us, it's not you, it's me. Right? It's not, that's me. Which you know from dating, if you should, that meant it was you. Right? They didn't want to tell you, they didn't know how to tell you, that it was definitely you. So it's really easy to break up with. So part of the reason this number is so low for us is because we have so many part-time students and most of them have no idea why they're here. And by the way, even if they did have an idea why they're here, you ever looked at that data on completion rates for part-time students? If you take a look at the actual 6 to 10, even go out 10-year completion rate of students who never are more than part-time at your college, all of a sudden 35 looks pretty good because that number is going to be closer to 15%. So there's a question about whether we should even be allowing this, which we're not going to go that far, right? But encouraging students to go full-time is a pretty big deal. And to do that, you have to have a clear value proposition. You have to have them be able to actually get a schedule together that works around their work schedule. Hold the scheduling conversation over here. I mean, one of the things about guided pathways, to preview this, is for years, our dominant paradigm has been we kind of teach what we want to teach when we want to teach it. We hired people under that model, by the way, which is not anyone's fault. But if you're going to go to a model that's focused on more students completing, you got to ask two different questions. What do students need to take to get to where they want to go? And when are you going to offer it so they can put a schedule together to take it? Those are two completely different frames, by the way. I joke sometimes we should have a mourning period for the old frame. We should actually go into mourning. It was cool and we didn't worry about that. But if we are going to worry about that, it requires us to think very differently about how we put courses together on programs and how we schedule. And that's not a trivial shift. It's a big shift. It's one of the big kind of shifts that comes later on in guided pathways. So part-time, full-time status, absolutely one reason for this. What are other reasons that Georgia State's number is so low and yours is even lower? Why are students not on PAP after a year? What are some other reasons?
They don't get out of DevEd.
Yes, thank you. They don't get out of DevEd. You can't get to 30 successful units in your first year, even if you're taking 30, if 18 of them are in DevEd. I will observe at this point that exactly 0% of your students come here to major in DevEd. Right? And if you're really honest, ask yourself how many of them are here to major in math or English. It's probably about 5%. Now, does that mean, math and English faculty, that math and English aren't important? Of course not. Math and English are tremendously important, right? However, what are they important for? To the student, they're important for something else that the student wants to do. And we've acted for the last 50 years as if those are the only two things that matter when a student gets here. And you're taking the two subjects that students hated the most in high school, did the worst in high school, and tell them this is what you have to do until we deem you to be a college student. Right? By the way, a lot of these students are already worried they're not college material. The first thing that happens when they come to us is we give them a test that confirms beyond a reasonable doubt that we agree with them. We agree also you're not college material. Congratulations, you were right about one thing. You're not college material. I mean, we don't write that in the form, although the net effect of it on your student psyche is pretty much that. We're disconnecting them from the college before they start. If you want them to care about math and English, tell them why they should care about math or English. And in why are they taking these courses? Well, you don't really know because you don't know what they're doing. You just say, well, they're important. That's what we say, right? Well, we don't know why they're important. We know why it's important. If someone's a business major, we can talk about why both of those things are important. If someone's going into STEM, yeah, you need this type of math. If you're going into psychology, maybe you need this type of math, right? English can be contextualized. That's another thing Lorraine's doing, is contextualizing English 1A to their meta majors. If you're a business major, you get an English 1A that has the same course outline, but has the context and the prompts all kind of around business ideas. Do the same for natural science, the same for social science. Takes a little work. I actually have to check back in with them to see how that's going. I think they just did that last fall. But that starts getting the people to see, why are they taking English, right? So that all matters. DevEd matters a lot because you can't get to 30 completed units for transferable units on a program if you're taking 18 in DevEd. A couple others real quick. Students taking courses that aren't on their program, right? Even if they did know what they're doing, like let's say that you actually do have students in their first year who know, I want to do business. Well, guess what? If you take 6 psychology courses, after the first one, the other 5 don't count. right? And so advisors try to help up front, but we'll do in a minute what happens after advising happens at the start. But students are taking courses off their paths. Another thing is, 12 is not full-time for any other reason than financial aid. I'm no mathematician, but 2 times 12 is 24, not 30. Right? You don't get to 30 by taking 2 12-unit course loads. And before we say students can't handle 15 units, by the way, I always want to check from an institutional racism and low income kind of status that when we say things students can't handle, let's be careful who we're talking about. Because we tend to be talking about low income students who tend to be students of color, right? And I know there's a lot of rural white poverty in America. By the way, I'm going to call out uncomfortable things today, so I hope you were ready for that. A lot of rural white poverty in America. There's also a lot of rural poverty from students of color and urban poverty from students of color. And before you think these two things are separate, because we like separating socioeconomic status and race in this country, because it's easier to talk about socioeconomic status. By the way, who's laughing right now? You're people of color, the one who are laughing right now. They're either smiling because they don't want to laugh out loud, or she's just laughing, right? So we try to separate those two things because it's far more comfortable to talk about socioeconomic status, right? But if you think those two things are really separate, ask yourself this question. And I am honest about this. If you know where this exists, tell me. Show me the zip code in this country where, on average, African American or Latino citizens make more money than white citizens. Show me that zip code in this country, because it does not exist. So if you think these two things are completely separate, they're not. Right? So we got to become more comfortable talking about this. And I say this, as you may know, as a white man standing in front of the room, we got to be more comfortable having open conversations about these two things. Right? Yeah, socioeconomic status matters, but so does race. And we didn't create the social system. The people in this room did not create the sociological conditions that have led to the fact that these two things are inexorably intertwined in this country. But we also are left at the door dealing with this problem more than most. Because if you look in higher education about where most students of color start, you're going to find that the answer is community colleges. It's also true of low-income students, by the way. So this is our story, right? It's a story we have to work on. But before we say things like students can't handle this, I will tell you some data that I had when I was at Foothill. My most successful group, if I looked in bands from 0 to 3 units, 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, 12 to 15, 15 to 18, or 18 of over units taken in a semester, who do you think it was? It was 18 and over. Now, of course, that's because they were in cohort-based CTE programs where they were very focused. But we can't jump to it's the units that are the problem. I mean, a lot of people in those programs also are working. They figured out a way to do this. We need to figure out a way to help, okay? So Complete College America calls their idea of this 15 to finish. I mean, they're good at one-liners. It's a pretty cool one-liner, right? So these are all reasons this number is so low. So what do you do? Okay, fine. We've looked at this. We see why this is so low. So Georgia State, what they did before we called it Guided Pathways, they did a number of things. They worked on structuring their programs so every student knows what to take in what order, right? They bring students into those programs differently now by having them, rather than choose between Georgia State's 100 programs, they come in their first year into one of 5 or 6 career focus areas that help them make that choice: business, natural science, social science, education, humanities, right? They also worked on refixing Dev Ed, because their other myth is that 4-year schools don't deal with Dev Ed. Now, half the students at Georgia State also test into what we would have historically done as Dev Ed, right? They worked on changing the way students get advising and have their progress monitored. No one falls through the cracks at Georgia State. And they also worked on student financial stability. And so here's what happened to this number over the 10-year period. So they tripled it. Like, I'm a data guy, so I used to make up data sets for my students, not for presentations, but my students. When I taught research methods and statistics, I would never give this data set as an example unless it was like a final exam question in graduate level education. How does this happen? How is it possible you take the same students and you triple the number of them that are on path after a year? It's a fascinating question, right? Now, before you go too far with this, same students, they didn't get new students that were better. They actually got to do a site visit of these guys. They said, we're going to do this with the students we have today. We're not doing this with some mythical student who came in the late 60s in a station wagon with care packages every week. Like, that's not our student. It never was. By the way, it never was their student. But we're not doing it with that student. We're doing it with the students we have. They did not get more money from the state. They did not get more money from the students. So this is a revenue neutral, student neutral change process. This is why it's so important. They changed themselves. They changed their structures. And this is a cool slide. I love this slide, right? And by the way, another piece of this story is it's a 10-year story. It's not a one-year story. They did this over time. It takes time to fundamentally change the system that's been going the same way for 700 years. It's not going to happen overnight, right? Some might say, hey, what happened right here? Man, this was cool in here. This is already a good story. But what happened in here? What was the secret sauce? You know what they said? They didn't do any specific thing different or new in year 6. They just learned from versions 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and 4.0, and made everything slightly better every year. And then, because they're not magic in Atlanta in the air, they were also doing these things disconnected. All those things I mentioned were disconnected back over here. They had someone working on program mapping, someone working on advising, they tied it all together here into a coherent whole that was student-facing. So lessons in there. A, this takes time. B, you got to learn from version. When we talk about those 30 colleges on the national project, when we said they're going to implement guided pathways and for fall of 2018 for all new students, that's version 1.0. They're going to figure out things in the fall of 2018 already that they're going to change for fall of 2019. That's part of this. It's long-term change. But this is cool. This is a great data slide, but it's not the real data slide that tells the story of Georgia State. That one is what happened to their graduation rates, including their graduation rates by race and ethnicity. So what do you see here? What you are looking at is the most transformational story of improvement in higher education in the 21st century, and you could argue back into the 90s and 80s. This is a college that went from a 31% graduation rate 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, to a 56% graduation rate. They've improved their graduation rate by 25 points. It has almost doubled. And look at what happened by ethnicity here. You have in the red the classic so-called achievement gap. And I say the word so-called for a very important reason, because when we use the term achievement gap, who does that place the blame on? The students. It's about student achievement. It's about students not achieving what we have laid out for them. It puts all the blame on them. It's an interesting phrase. Turn to the phrase. One equity writer named Gloria Ladson-Billings in the mid-2000s said, maybe we should stop calling this the achievement gap and start talking about the educational debt that the system has accrued by allowing these outcomes to stay the same. Interesting idea. I hope she's still looking at data, because this is a pretty strong argument for her case. They didn't change the students. They changed their structure. They changed their policies. They changed themselves. They looked inward, and student behavior changed. Look, I'm a social psychologist, right? I fundamentally believe that people will behave differently in different situations, right? Go back to the Stanford prison experiment of the early 70s. You got 50 studies that show us the situation matters. So change the structure of the situation of the culture at the college. It doesn't surprise me that student behavior changes. But the behavior changing was not done by trying to fix the student. It was done by trying to fix the structures and processes. This is why this story is so important. Now also you see, by the way, the so-called achievement gap is gone. This is now one of the only colleges in the country that has African American and Latino students graduating at higher rates than white students, right? So it's completely gone. By the way, there's no programs trying to fix white students now at Georgia State, like we're often trying to fix African American Latino students. Now there's another part to this story, by the way, which actually is also about institutional racism, which is that if you actually, I asked Tim, the provost here, Tim, I said, Tim, why, I mean, by the way, it still got much better for the white students. It's not like they made the white students go down. They're also achieving at 18 points higher than they used to be, which is over a 50% increase, right? That's a big number, right? So I said, but I was asking, why do you think this happened? Because my head goes to, okay, our system historically most doesn't work for low-income students who tend to be students of color. Maybe when you change the system, it works better for those who are historically not worked in the system. He's like, I think that's also, he said, I think that's very true, and that is a big part of the story. But the other part of the story, what they just found out this year, is that if they actually tracked the students graduating from Georgia State and or other institutions, this is what the numbers look like. So note, this still, by the way, is a very good story. But first of all, it's much higher than it used to be. And I said, Tim, what's going on here? He's like, this is another interesting institutional racism story. So the story here is that who are the two flagships in Georgia? University of Georgia in Athens and Georgia Tech, right? These are the two flagships in Georgia. So their freshman entrance requirements, they're not doing this, by the way, to weed people out, but their freshman entrance requirements are very strict. But their transfer requirements aren't. Why would that be? Anyone know the subtle reason? What are the U.S. News and World Report rankings based on? Freshmen. Transfer students do not factor into any of the rankings that go on around colleges. So when colleges care about rankings, which most Research One flagships do, one way to inflate your rankings is be more stringent with your entrance requirements and then open the doors for more transfer students. Which is exactly what Georgia and Georgia Tech are doing. And so what's happening here is the white students who have more, on average, have more money in the Atlanta area are able to transfer to Georgia and Georgia Tech at higher rates, so they end up going. The African American and Latino students, there aren't that many Hispanic students at Georgia State, by the way, mainly African American students, don't have that ability to go to the flagship, which I think is something they probably could work on. But at the end of the day, I'm still pretty happy if I'm Georgia State with what's happened to this data, right? Why do I show you this? And by the way, one last part of this story, you might ask, hey, what's happened to their diversity? Did they just get rid of all these students that we like to call challenging, which by the way should also be code for us? Did they do this with a less challenging student population? Well, interestingly, in 2003, Georgia State was 60% white, 30% African American, and a little less than 10% Latino. Now they are 50% white, 40% African American, and a little less than 10% Latino. So that theory, it's not that either, right? Remember, economics stayed the same, SAT scores stayed the same, student mix actually got more diverse. So we all do this in our heads, by the way. It's natural to want to discount good things happening at other places as why that can't happen here or why that's not really the full story. You can look at this 20 ways to Tuesday and you're not going to get there, aside from the conclusion that it is what they did at the college to their structures and policies and cultures that resulted in this change, right? Now this should empower you. This should put you in a place to say, this is why we need to work on these things that we're about to talk about here, because this change is possible. And before you look at this, especially this here, and think, because let's look within Georgia State. Before you look at this as a great slide or a cool chart or a cool graph, stop thinking of it that way. What is it? It's student lives. 4,000 new students enter Georgia State every fall, have been about the same since 2003. In 2003, 1,200 of those students would graduate. Now it's 2,300. That's 1,100 student lives, citizens of Georgia, who are now getting degrees that bridge to a family-sustaining wage. That's 11,000 students in a year. Do that in your head, because that's why you're doing this. You're not doing this because CCRC wrote a book or Gates funded some projects or a bozo in a Hawaiian shirt was clowning around in front of the room. That's not why you do this. You do this because you do care, and I know you do, deeply about your students and their lives and your community. Most of your students come from your community. It is that many lives hanging in the balance. You got 9,000 students, I'm guessing 2,000 new students every year? Ish? 2,000 new students every year. Let's say your completion rate's, let's say it's 30% for the sake of argument. So right now, 600 students a year complete. If it was 50, it'd be 1,000. That's 400 students in your classrooms, in your advising offices a year, 4,000 students in a decade, who, if you were to see this type of increase, would have their lives benefited for the good and to reach their goals at the college. That's why you pay attention to this, and that's why if you get into this and you go down this path, you stick with it when it gets hard. Because it's going to get hard, because we're going to talk about some things that are controversial, all right? So this is the Georgia State story. I'm going to go through the economic mobility stuff pretty quickly because I want to get to the game show because I can see you guys need a game show. I'm reading that in this room. Here's the story here. I'll do 5 minutes on this. There's some cool slides in here. You can say back to me, and I will believe you, that higher education is about more than just economic mobility, right? I am, by the way, I fast forwarded one too far. That was my big next question. I'm a big fan of a liberal arts education and an educated citizenry. I'm a social psychologist, of course I am. Right? So we're about more than just economic mobility. But let's ask yourself the following question. What percentage of your students attend your college solely for the love of learning? You want to throw out a number here? Anyone want to go over 5%? No. I did this a couple months ago in Texas. A woman came up to me. She was an econ professor. And she said, Rob, I asked this of all of my students on day one, and I've been doing it for 15 years. So she's been a full-time econ professor at a Texas community college for 15 years. Day one, so figure out the math. She got 9 sections, 32 sections. You got 3,000 students she's seen over the last 15 years. She had a multiple choice question with like 10 options. She said no one in 15 years ever chose the love of learning. Like, what was the percentage? She's like, what was the percentage? It was 0, right? Okay, so I'm willing to grant 3 to 5% of students are here for a love of learning. I will observe, by the way, why are we still at an institution? Those of us who work here. Faculty. We want to help students succeed, but we also love learning, right? We got into academia, those of you who are faculty especially, but all of us, because we love learning. So there is this tendency to think that our students are miniature versions of us, or that we're trying to make them miniature versions of us, which, by the way, is what that 700-year-old model was trying to do. That model was designed to produce enough people to be miniature versions of the people who were professors in universities so that the field stayed together. It wasn't meant for economic mobility. We've added this, right? So the point here is, again, I, by the way, will strongly argue that 98% of your students are career focused. That doesn't mean they're all in welding or they're all in surge tech, which, by the way, we should stop talking about the students who are in cohort-based CTE programs if they're somehow lesser or different, right? They're all on a path to a family-sustaining wage. I was too. I was a low-income student in California. I had 100% Pell to go to school. Still paying off the freaking loans. I went 9 straight years, but I knew that during those 9 years, I sure needed a career at the end, because I was going to have a hell of a lot of student loans, and so I needed a better career apparently, because I'm still paying them off. Getting there. But it doesn't matter whether you're a psych transfer student or you're in a short-term EMT certificate, you're thinking about a career at some point. You may not know what that career is, but in the back of your head it matters. Now, I don't think this means the liberal arts isn't important. I'm going to argue it's actually more important in 2017 than it was in 1967. Why? Because in 1967, you were probably going to have 1 career when you came out of higher ed. Now you're going to have 3 to 7 careers, right? So when you change from accounting to surge tech, or from surge tech to accounting, the courses you took in accounting or surge tech, they don't go with you. What goes with you? The liberal arts education. They say, I don't know what your institutional learning outcomes are. I don't need to, because they have some version of the following 5 words. Critical thinking, computation, communication, citizenship, creativity. Some version of those 5 words are everyone's institutional learning outcomes, right? Yeah. So interesting, by the way, when you talk to employers about graduates of 2-year programs, 4-year programs, master's programs, and doctor's programs, you say, hey, how are our graduates doing in your workplace? Mostly what employers say to us, they're doing great, we really love them. And when you press a little, say, what are the 2 or 3 things they struggle with the most?
Soft skills.
Which are?
Critical thinking.
Communication. Interesting.
Yeah.
So what's fascinating to me here is the very things we hold dear as the nexus of the liberal arts education are the things that employers tell us our students can't do when they graduate. Now I want to be really clear. This is not a community college problem. This is a higher education issue. So there's something lost in translation between what we do. Now I would also argue critical thinking being my favorite one. Where is critical thinking in the curriculum? Well, we say it's, and we do, right? It should be, and maybe it is. But if I was to sit you down and say, how does critical thinking develop in your students over a 2-year pathway? You'd be like, well, I don't know what pathway they're on. Well, there's problem 1. Once you look at your GE package, you realize there's 2 billion combinations of courses that they can take in any order.
That's a critical thinking problem.
That is exactly a critical thinking problem. No one would design a system from scratch to say, how would you develop critical thinking? Just go take a bunch of courses. How many of you went to grad school? How many of you showed up at grad school and they said, it's cool, just take whatever you want for a year and come back and talk to us, we'll figure this out later. There's usually 1 hand from the humanities, by the way, which is cool. I love you people, by the way, which is awesome. But we don't do things that way with graduate students. Why? Because we're backward designing things when we know what they're going to need. We don't do it in surge tech. We don't do it with honors programs. Interestingly, all of those programs have really high completion rates. But in terms of the liberal arts outcomes, I would argue we don't have any intentional design to actually lead to that. It's one of those, it happens over here, over there. And that's just the way it's been. Well, employers are telling us that's not working. So we've got that problem too. So I argue, by the way, 2 things here. One is when students change careers, they need the liberal arts skills that we talk about to go with them. And 2, industry's telling us the liberal arts translation from what we're doing in higher education to the workplace isn't working. Seems to me we need to elevate this conversation. I believe firmly that you can elevate it with a guided pathways discussion, because then we actually have to sit down and talk about what's your area? Community engagement, all right, that's a bad example. Faculty at this table, any faculty at this table? What's your program? Business, perfect. I was looking for that. I thought he might be business or humanities. I was going to the humanities thing. We have that look about us. Community engagement's close enough. All right, business though. So the question we might ask business faculty, all right, what are the skills your students need to know upon either transfer or direct entry to the workforce, and how do we work backwards to get them those skills, not only in the business courses, but in the gen ed courses? My guess is you could pick 10 gen ed courses that you would put on a pathway that you would suggest students take in a certain order along with your courses that would form a program plan that would be backward designed from the outcomes that you want. I would guess every one of you faculty in a program could do that. And that's the heart of the Guided Pathways movement, is that we actually talk to faculty about, and then we have to also pay attention to transfer, because we could design the best thing ever within business here, and Toledo could go, cool, we're not taking any of those courses, right? So we have to work together on this. But this is one of the big ideas, is we can actually work on these things, these liberal arts things, and not let it be an accident. So while I think economic mobility is critical, it doesn't mean that these things aren't important. But here's my other thing. Who's economic mobility most important to? Poor people. Right? If you come out of the highest income bracket, economic mobility doesn't matter to you. It's about holding on, right? And so the economic mobility to poor people is much more important, right? If you're in the lower half of the income spectrum, this matters a lot to you, more so than it does if you're in the upper half. Okay, well, who's in our student population then? Let's take a quick look. And we already talked about this. There's this correlation between race and income. So these are guys and women who are at those bastions of caring about the poor. Stanford, Brown, Harvard, Berkeley, MIT, and Cambridge. Clear champions of the poor, right, exactly. What's ironic about this is these are actually economists from these schools who are pointing out to their own schools, yeah, stop talking about serving low-income students because you don't, right? Now, I went to one of these schools because they had some sort of program from East San Jose. I went to Stanford as one of these schools. I can tell you about being from the lowest income quintile at Stanford is exactly the experience that's about to be reported here with your peers and colleagues talking about their study abroad programs by the time they get there. And I'm hoping I can get my 64 Dodge Dart to campus and back when I need to go see my family, which didn't happen a couple times, by the way. So these guys write on this, and the point is, so let's look at Harvard. So if the American dream were still in effect, at least on one domain, which would be access to elite private higher education. If we had the American dream in play, it would say that it wouldn't matter where you started, by parent income quintile, so rich down to poor. If the American dream in terms of access to Harvard were a reality, it'd be 20% across the board. You'd have equal access to Harvard no matter where you started. Well, I think you can see that's not really going on. Now, let's be clear. Harvard does not have in their mission anywhere, we are here to serve the poor. It is our primary mission to work on economic. Now, it's good that they don't have that. They occasionally make statements around that, because they all do, right? But 70% of their students come from the top income quintile, 83, so 5 out of 6 students of Harvard come from the upper 40% of the income quintile, and this one's fascinating. 15% come from the top 1%. So the 1%er thing, there's more in the top 1% at Harvard than almost in the bottom 3 quintiles, right? These, by the way, are students whose families make over $750,000 a year. Okay? So obviously Harvard is not the place where you're seeing poor students go. Is it just Harvard? No, it's not just Harvard. I love this category, by the way. It's the Ivy League, but it's a new category. It's the Ivy Plus. We've included Chicago, Stanford, MIT, and Duke. Why? Remember who the researchers on the project were? Oh, look at that. All of a sudden, we got a new category. It's not just the Ivy League. By the way, when I went to Stanford, we had a T-shirt. You know, Harvard's motto is Veritas, which is like Latin bullshit. So we had a T-shirt that said Veritas, and then the back said Veritan, because there was a picture of being in California with a palm tree. So that was, we were witty, and you know, it wasn't, yeah, anyway. So what do you see when you're at the Ivy Plus? So now here's 12 elite higher ed institutions. You see, again, 15% of the students are from the top 1%, and 14 are from the bottom 50, right? So again, it is not the mission of these 12 colleges to work on this, but the point here is elite private education is not the bridge to people who are low income, right? So we got to look past this. By the way, you're probably, this is a good one, your probability of attending an elite private college is 77 times higher if you're in the top 1% versus the bottom 20. I mean, that's pretty far from that's not even the top 20, it's the top 1%. So let's look at some other colleges. So there's Harvard. Let's look at, all right, so what about the public flagships? Now, you're going to think I picked this. This is not my slide. I picked the next college, UC Berkeley, because I went to Stanford and we're rivals. There's no rivalries on the West Coast in sports. Like, this is not Michigan, Ohio State. Stanford Cal's like, we lost. We'll go to the beach. It's all good. Right? We don't care. You guys are like depressed for days. Like, it's a whole thing. Yeah, exactly. The beaches just aren't as good here. I know, it's rough. It's cold. It's windy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. It's good. It's September still. Exactly. So I'm not picking on Berkeley, although it's interesting. Wherever you are politically, you can kind of guess where I am after the morning's conversation. I actually think that I'm cool with all of it. The point here, though, is Berkeley is usually known as that bastion of the left, free speech, the free everything movements. Well, that apparently doesn't quite go all the way to their admissions policies, right? That's a little different. Because it's not quite as stark as Harvard. But this actually surprised, I grew up in the Bay Area. I still live half time in Santa Cruz. It surprised me that Berkeley is this stark of a curve still. Again, here's the American dream. Here's where Berkeley is. Berkeley, not the answer. So it's not public flagships either. So let's look at the regionals. And here's where you start seeing more low-income students. So anyone from Long Island, by the way, by any chance? This is fascinating because I have this mental perception of Long Island as being like the Hamptons and really rich area. And Stony Brook's like halfway out on Long Island. So this actually makes this more, because I ask some folks, I'm in New York sometimes, is Stony Brook in a poor area? No, it's not. It's actually in a fairly well-off area, which makes this even more surprising. Because they're getting poor students from other places to come here so that it is almost the American dream in action. Doesn't matter where your income level is. They're doing a really good job here at Stony Brook. And there are other regional 4-years who look like this. But where are community colleges, you ask? And here's where all the low-income students are going, right? Now, this is LA, Glendale Community College. If you know LA, you'll know that Glendale's not the poorest part of LA. It's actually an upper middle-class suburb. So, which is what often happens with community colleges in suburban areas, is that you're getting the poor. This is where the poor students in the upper-class areas go, right? Santa Barbara City College is one of the Aspen Prize winners, which everyone wants to think, yeah, Santa Barbara, that's a community college on a bluff overlooking the ocean in a rich community. Of course they do better. Well, it is a community college on a bluff over the ocean in a rich community, but 35% of their students are low-income Hispanic students. They're an HSI, even though only 15% of the students in their community are Hispanic. So here's a college who is getting all of the students who are poor and students of color to come to the college, and they do very well there because they've built bridges back into the high school and to the CSUs. But here's where your students are. Here's where the low-income students are. They're in community colleges around the country. So what this says to me is, whether or not you wanted the mantle of responsibility for economic mobility for low-income citizens in this country, we've got it, right? We're going to need our regional 4-year partners to do it as well, right? But we are the system that are serving low-income students in this country. And at the moment, the system that we've put together isn't serving them very well, okay? Not out of intention. This wasn't on purpose. We just haven't moved the system far enough. All right, so now we're going to have a little bit of fun. I told you, I'm going to do one thing before. Hey, my advisor friend, what's your name? Angie. Angie is not shy. I like Angie. Angie's actually been sitting on her vocal cords the last 20 minutes. She's wanted to say 4 other things, and she's like, I'm going to wait. He told me he'd come back to me. All right, Angie. So you've got those 15 minutes to do all those things we talked about. So at the end of those 15 minutes, what is the net result for the student usually? What's next for them?
Usually registration.
Yeah, and so what do you try to get them to do in registration?
Log into their ozone and their student portal.
What do you try to get them to take?
Well, are they new or are they
New.
in math and English?
Right, and what else? It's gen ed courses. Right? Now, the point is, this is not in any way diminishing advising, by the way. The point is, you've got 15 minutes, right? You've got the basic time to get someone through 15 minutes. You know they need to take math or English. We already talked about how they don't want to take those. And the other thing we say to them, it's okay, we've got this gen ed package here. This isn't yours, by the way, I hope. Yours is much better, I'm sure. It probably is. This is chosen. But the point is, nobody looks at this and goes, oh, I see what to do. I got it. I got this. Especially first-time in college students who haven't had a great history of navigating educational systems. Like, we could go through this if we have more time, like all the bullshit that's on here, like codes and requirements and things that we don't know.
That one right there in the middle, letters, L, 6 credits.
Right, I mean, what's letters? Yeah.
Of course,
But there's some stuff in here that I don't know what some of these are. What's RLS? Russian Literature Studies? I mean, I don't know. Wow, that's an interesting one these days. All right, sorry, I'm not doing a Russia thing. We're not going to do that. The point is, no one looks, look, I'm a social psychologist. We know a lot about when people get paralyzed. And I say people, humans get paralyzed with choice, because we tend to dehumanize students as if they're some other species. If students were just rational decision makers like we are, then the world would be a better place. They're just like you are, and you're not rational either, right? We've got 40 years of research from social psychology showing how irrational we are in decision making, and 40 years of research that also suggests the number of things we can rationally make decisions between without getting paralyzed. 2 to 5. So there are occasional research who will go to 6, but 3 to 5 is the number. There's billions of combinations here. Like Carl's, billions and billions of combinations. The other thing, like, you want more proof of this? You got a Cheesecake Factory near you? Ever been to a Cheesecake Factory, looked at that menu? I mean, there's actually too many things to read in the time you have to make a decision, right? Early research on the Cheesecake Factory, I was in industry when this came out, is that what actual patrons of the Cheesecake Factory chose in the early days, after they had the 225 options, were the same 5 things they could have gotten at Applebee's. Why? Because you go with what you know when you're paralyzed, right? And unfortunately, what many of our students know is not navigating educational systems very well and stopping. So when they see this, their common response is, holy Nikes. There's my stepdaughter says, holy shiitake mushrooms. We get lost, we get confused. Our students are telling us, one of the worst things about this is, who do they blame at the end of the day, mostly?
Their advisor.
Well, they blame Angie. No, they don't do that. That's not what, they don't do that. They blame themselves. So these very students who have the rhetoric of, I'm not sure I'm college material, they've come in, they've taken these placement tests that confirm they're not college material, then they're given this, and they're like, wow, I'm really not college material. Right? So this is the dominant paradigm in a lot of their heads. And again, it makes it really easy for them to drop out. But let's for a second go, we're going to play, anyone, name the tune. There we go. We're going to play Family Feud for a couple minutes here. All right. This will be a little fun. All right. So not just advisors. This is for all of us now, not just advisors. What questions are new students asking advisors? Top 6 answers on the board. What do new community college students ask advisors? Go.
How much money can I get?
How much can I, say more, hold on. How much money can I get? Do you mean for financial aid?
Yes.
Financial aid? Okay. How much financial aid should I get? Table 1's on the board.
You got the board.
Table 1's on the board. Over here, what was that?
When can I graduate?
When can I graduate? How long will it take? How quickly can I get through here? Table 2 with the response. What else? How much money will I make when I graduate? We're going to loop this under number 1. You get a big one for that. Careers. Like, how much money can I make? What can I do with this? What are my options for careers? What else?
They can't navigate the system, the computer system.
Put it into a question, though. What's the question?
How do I sign up?
All right. I love that one. But I also love that noise. No, I think it's important that you're right, and that is certainly one. I think this is what they're asking as they're considering college, though. So that, by the way, is a very real thing we should not discount. What else? That's an interesting one. That's usually number 6, because not all of them are asking this. Will my credits transfer? That's a fair question. 2 left. Oh, my goodness, there it is. What courses should I take? Down to 1. By the way, I love that one. I love that one. That's good. I love that. That's good. It's related to number 5, is your clue, which is how much financial aid can I get?
When do I get my money? How much does it cost?
How much will it cost? All right. By the way, there's another round. Don't worry if you didn't get a chance. Coming up. All right. So these are the top 6 questions students ask. All right. Anyone think these are unreasonable questions for your students to ask? Seem pretty damn reasonable to me. Cool. Now let's try another little exercise. Assuming that Owens is like any of my colleges or your standard, what we now call the cafeteria college. Let's take 10 students. Any psych instructors in the room? You? She's like, I don't want him talking to me, but I'm going to do this. Damn it, he saw my hand. All right, what's your name?
What's my name?
Yeah. She's like, easy. Liz, did you say? L-I-Z. All right, so we're going to take 10 students out of Liz's Psych 1 class on November 1st. Why November 1st? Because they're in like their 8th or 9th week. And we're also going to only take 10 students who started last fall and are continuously enrolled. So they're in the middle of their third semester at the college. They're in a Psych 1 course. I've picked Psych for a very specific reason that doesn't have to do with Liz. It's because it's very indicative of the classic gen ed pre-transfer model without much structure. So I'm going to take those 10 students, I'm going to buy them pizza for lunch. Okay? We're going to talk to them, do a focus group, ask them a bunch of questions, but the one thing we're going to do during that is show this list to these 10 students and say, how many of you feel like you have really good answers to these questions at Owens Community College right now? How many of those 10 students do you think are going to answer, yeah, I feel pretty good about the answers to these questions right now? 2? Dominant answer is 2. It's actually really close to the right answer, at least what we've looked at, is a little less than 2. So 2 of 10 students feel like they have good answers to these questions right now. Now, by the way, I did not pick a surge tech or a welding program for a very important reason. If you ask it there, they're going to tell you 9 out of 10 they know the answers to these questions. Hold that thought. So only 2 or maybe 3 out of 10 at the most know the answers to these questions. That seems like a problem to me because we all agreed they were important. And if you want further evidence they're important, consider this. Is there another type of higher educational institution who is stealing your students left and right that has really good answers to these questions? For-profit schools, proprietary schools, brief ethical kind of side note, is that, by the way, some of you may teach or have worked at proprietary schools. We think good people try to do good work at proprietary schools. Having said that, graduation rates at proprietary schools are the same or worse than they are at most community colleges. Anyone know what it is for University of Phoenix, the one who has the most money, the most advertising? 22% graduation rate. Now, I have a moral and ethical problem with that. Charging 10 times as much for the same or worse outcomes, which, by the way, I don't know. I don't think the president's in the room. I have a new marketing slogan that you can try. Fail with us, it's cheaper. Just kidding. The truth in advertising hurts. Dude, too much truth on a Friday morning.
We had a student that got to class, she's like, well, at least it's not going to cost as much here as it would at the college I'm training.
There you go. That's yeah. Get that sometimes. Point being, although I'm interested in the moral and ethical issues around, I think there are good people trying to do good work. What I'm most interested in is why they're stealing your students. And why is that? They mark. So people want to say it's marketing, right? And I say, yeah, it's marketing, but what are they marketing? The answers to all 6 of these questions. Not number 6, by the way. That's where they fall very, very short. They conveniently leave out number 6. And by the way, number 4, they downplay number 4. Because they work on we're going to get you the financial aid you need. Yeah, you get them half financial aid for something that costs 10 times as much, they're still paying 5 times as much, right? And running up more loans. So, not all of this is like totally legit. And this, how long will it take? What they say is how long it could take. You can get through here really fast. Yeah, they could, but their time to degree is not quicker, right? I mean, all these commercials are the same, right? It's always someone at 11:30 at night, usually a woman. She's in her pajamas. She's opening her computer at 11:30, a really happy look on her face, right? They've conveniently left out the first 16 hours of her day, right? Got up at 6, got the kids up, got them to breakfast, got them to school, went to work for 8 hours, came home, cooked dinner. I mean, she may have a spouse. He's probably useless. I mean, it's all. And so she then gets the kids to bed. Now it's time, right? Now it's time to open up the laptop and start my online education. So it's not surprising to me that it doesn't work very well. You guys also know online courses aren't easier, they're harder. Especially for students who don't have a lot of experience navigating higher education structures, which should remind us, by the way, who flocks to these colleges more? Low-income students and students of color. So the very students we need to be the most good for are the ones leaving us in droves for the 10 times more expensive option with the same or worse outcomes. We could do this, right? We don't need to market it. We need to do it first. We can open with careers. By the way, they always start with careers. You can't go take Psych 1 at the University of Phoenix unless Psych 1's the next class on your program. We could do that. You wouldn't lose enrollment. They don't lose enrollment in Psych 1. They just tell them what order to take Psych 1 in, right? We could do all of these things, is the point. And our students are clearly clamoring for it because they tell us these things are important, and they leave us for people who are telling them they have the answers. Okay, that's one thought for guided pathways. Here's another. Second round of feud. Do a time check here. Good, 13 minutes, perfect. Never a doubt That whole 10-minute soliloquy at the start was cool. I really wasted time. Why are blank so successful? This is old timers like me. We're also going like Match Game 77 here, right? I got to find that plug-in to start with. Why are blank so successful? Because it would be cool. Because who are the two groups you have on campus that are highly successful? I gave you one, sake of time. Cohort-based CTE students. Any program chairs of those programs in the room right now? Besides nursing? What's your program? Dental. What's your success rate in the dental program? Graduation. Cohort. 80, right? 80 is pretty good. It's a lot better than 35. By the way, it's not 35 if you take out the cohort-based CTE programs. It's not 35 anymore. It's like 25, 20. So you're 3 to 4 times higher. Nursing always higher because I love nursing as an example. The problem with nursing is because it's selective, it always gets discounted. You're just creaming up the top students, right? I think that downplays what nursing does. Point is, by the way, anyone in like welding or any of the kind of more blue-collar programs still have those success rates, by the way. 65, 70, 75%. Okay, cool. That's one group. I don't know if you have this other group, but to save some time, the other group is a gen ed group. They are primarily 18 to 21 years old. Their sole goal is transfer. And on most community colleges, this is a really interesting group. It's athletes. You guys have community college athletics? Yeah, anyone coaching one of those teams in the room? They're actually coaching. Okay. If you had the women's volleyball coach here and you asked her or him, hey, what was the transfer rate of your team last year? They're going to give you a number in the 70s, 80s, or 90s too. These two students could not be more different. There is nobody in the dental hygiene program who's also on the women's volleyball team. There's almost zero overlap between these two groups of students. What's interesting, though, is to say, all right, well, let's take them together. Why are these two groups of students so successful? Second round of the prize. Why are community college athletes, and by the way, we're not talking 4-year men's basketball, we're not talking about Louisville, we're not talking about elite 4-year programs. Anyone go to Louisville?
Louisville's not going, they're not going to be playing.
They're not going to be playing. Yeah, I know. Hey, but hold on a sec. Anyone know what the graduation rate is for all NCAA athletics? 80. Everyone wants to look at the poor graduation rates of the top programs you see on TV. Across the board, the graduation rate of folks who started a 4-year school who are NCAA athletes their freshman year is 80%. So let's not discount athletics in the 4 years either, but I mean, we're not talking about that group. Community college athletics is very different. No scholarships, right? But they do have a lot of support. So why are these students so successful? Go. Whoop. Hold on, wait. I gotta get back. This is now a test of my memory to see if I can get these all right. All right, what's the first one?
Focus.
They have discipline and accountability, right? Athletes have an accountability from their coach. They know what, by the way, they know they need to keep a certain GPA with a certain number of units. They got a very clear path in front of them. If you're in the dental hygiene program, you know that when you get out of here, you got a licensure exam and a job you're going to have to do. You have to have, and the other thing in both of these cases is you're taught you don't do things right the first time. It takes practice and hard work to get good at something, which is something we have a hard time with many of our student populations who aren't in, call it productive persistence, call it grit, call it whatever you want. Our number one response to failure, unless it's scaffolded right, is to stop doing something. It's not acceptable for athletes if you're in a CTE program. You practice it until you get it right, to get better. So that's a big one. What else? What was the first one? Advising. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of where, boom, I got it right. Mandatory support, right? So in either of these cases, you don't have to find support, it finds you, right? If you're in the dental hygiene or the surge tech program or the welding program and you're having writing trouble, what happens? She helps you get writing support from the writing center or a tutor in English. If you're an athlete, you've got mandatory support. You got study hall, you don't show up, you don't play. You've also got usually an athletic advisor who meets with you every semester, right? Which leads you to another one, I'm going to give you the bonus, is clear course paths, right? Obviously, the dental hygiene program, you know exactly what you're taking all 4 semesters, and your athletes are given advising at the end of each semester that tells them what to take the next semester. There's no question about what courses you take. You got someone sitting down with you to say, take these courses next. It's harder for athletes, by the way, because they don't know where they're going to be junior standing in a major when they transfer, because there's a big difference to going to Toledo, Western Michigan, or New Mexico State in terms of which courses are going to transfer. So we do have an issue, by the way, I'm not sure this is solvable with athletes, of athletes having trouble graduating on time after they transfer because a lot of the stuff doesn't go with them. But if you do know in the 4th semester where you're going, then the athletic advisor makes that bridge for them. So this is absolutely another one. What's a third one? Fourth one? Say more about that. What about eligibility? Yeah, I put that under discipline and accountability. I think we're not going to buzz that one because I think it's the same thing. I'm pulling up my list here because I don't remember the order. Keep going.
Peer support.
That one I know. I love peer support. Peer support, right? In both cases, you have a community of your peers working with you who want you to succeed. Starting quarterback on the football team, 98 of the other 99 guys want you to succeed. The other guy's the backup quarterback who's perfectly happy if you fail out. Get out of there. But you've got peer support, and I'm going to give you a bonus one here, which I like to buzz sometimes. Uniforms. This is kind of a joke, but it's kind of not. Right? A sense of identity, a sense of attainment, a sense of status, whether it's the dental hygiene smocks or it's the women's volleyball shirts that they're wearing around campus, you know they're part of the group. They're part of this campus. The folks from CESI, the Center for Student Engagement, talk about the relationship between engagement and success. All of your athletes and CTE students are engaged. They have structural bonds to the campus, which your average student in Liz's or my Psych 1 class doesn't have, right? What any others? Internships. I need to buzz that just because it's cool. I like it, but I needed to buzz. I love that. Here's ticking time clock, which is what I have right now because get you guys out of here by 11. If you're an athlete, you got 5 years to play 4. Hey, what's your average time to degree for most students? 4.5 years? What is it for your athletes? Between 2 and 2.5 years. So it's clearly not the case that students can't graduate more quickly if they are motivated. Motivation being number one here is fascinating because these students are motivated by completely different things. Could not be more different sources of motivation. One, direct entry into the workforce, a job, a living wage, a family-sustaining wage. That's there. The athlete side, they want to play at the four-year school, potentially maybe earn a scholarship that pays for the more expensive part of their education. Either way, they're motivated. Highly motivated. So apparently it's not what motivates you, it's that you're highly motivated. This is important to us because it means that we have a chance to motivate people on other things. And the final one here is a chair or coach. Now this is actually, I love this one. So what this is this is an institutional agent invested in this student's success. This is someone whose responsibility is to hold high standards, but help their students achieve them. It's something most of your students don't have, right? If I was to ask her, I know what the answer is going to be, so I'll just do it. Have any of the students ever fallen through the cracks of your program without your knowing it first? No, because you're monitoring their progress all the time. Athletes, we monitor their progress all the time. Progress reports. Someone's job is to navigate for the students, not to do their work, but to hold them to high standards and also make sure they have, what do we tell athletes and we tell students these programs? This is going to be hard, but we're here to help you do it, and we're going to be there along the way for you. So again, net of all of this, these are pretty big reasons why these two groups of students who could not be more different, their goals are different, their setup is different, but this is what binds them together, and these are the two groups you have who have a 75, 80, 85% completion rate. If you really want to scare yourself sometimes, take out those two groups from your denominator and now recalculate the success rate for whoever's left. That 35 just went way down. It can drop into the low teens, by the way, which should give us pause. Where we have this, we have success. By the way, honors programs, which take your top students, also are highly structured and have all these features. Right? So do graduate programs. Where we see this, we see success. Which brings us in the last couple of minutes, and this is actually not that far behind because I don't like to do anything other than introduce what are the big ideas of guided pathways. So what do we take out of all of that about our mission of economic mobility, about why our students struggle? And by the way, when you talk to students, they also tell you, we have this myth that students enjoy wandering. They like wandering through our curriculum. Well, interestingly, if you ask them that, they don't. Please tell me what I need to take to get to where I want to go and help me figure out what that is. The wandering thing is partially a persistent myth. Why? Because a lot of people who ended up academia are wanderers. So we're very protective of the path that led us to where we are. The problem with that is, and if we had 90% graduation rates, you could be really protective of that path. The fact that 30% of our students are completing, so the wandering isn't working, should be a bigger issue than our protection of that idea that was helped us to get to where we are, right? And so these over here, this is a graphic, by the way, we put together on that national project. The interesting thing is now 10 national organizations have signed on to this as what we mean when we say guided pathways. It's actually getting these 10 organizations to agree on anything is a major development. But on the right, you have what are the 4 big ideas of guided pathways? Clarify the path. You map all programs so students know what to take in what order. Help students get on a path. All right, students are undecided. How do we help them decide? How do we roll career options earlier in the process so that it's not something that people ask about when they're leaving us, right? How do we get students through Dev Ed into the work that they want to do more quickly, whether it's acceleration or co-rec models, both of which work very well. How do we help students stay on their path? Once they get in, what do we do to help them stay on, right? You guys don't have mandatory advising after the first semester, right? No, so it's drop-in, right? Students drop in advising after, like once they start, it's drop-in, which is the way it is at 85% of community colleges in the country. Both of mine were the same way. So when I was at Foothill, I asked my researcher, hey, why don't you calculate for me the GPA of students who used, we had a swipe card at the time whenever students used tutoring or advising, the writing, anything, psych services. Tell me the GPA of students who use any of those services more than twice in a semester. What do you think that GPA was? 371. So we were brilliant at helping B+ students become A- students, but all those students were already going to transfer or graduate. We had a small bump at the bottom, by the way, the 0.0 students. Why? Because when we put them on probation, we required them to come meet with us. So we were either helping the students who were going to be on their way out because they were already succeeding, or the students who were on their way out because they were already failing. We were missing the 70% of students in the middle. If you're going to move your graduation/completion rate up, it's not going to be by finding more unicorns at the top, the ones who are going to navigate you no matter what you do. Put a dragon in a moat, it's all good, they'll figure it out. We offer the wrong books, we show up for half the classes. They'll figure you out and pass your tests anyway, right? There's 15 or 20 of those. They're going to succeed no matter what you do. There's probably 10 at the bottom who no matter what you do aren't going to succeed. And down here you have psychological trauma, you have undiagnosed learning disabilities, you have issues down here, right? Got to make sure demographically that the bottom group is not very different than the middle group, then you've got a different problem. It's usually not. Is the bottom group different than the top group? Yeah, because the top group tends to be ones who come from families who are more well off. Not all of them, but more well off with more resources. But the bottom 2 groups look the same. That middle group is where your leverage is. You have no leverage at the top. You're not finding more unicorns. Everyone's looking for them. Harvard has them. You're not getting more than 15 or 20. Neither is Toledo, by the way. They're getting 25. That's not where the difference is. The difference is you have 70 students in the middle. So let's just say there's 20 at the top. You get 19 out of 20 to succeed at the top, one magic 1 out of 10 at the bottom. That means you got 20 of those 35. You have a 35% completion rate. That means you're only getting 15 of the 70 in the middle through. And too many of our procedures and policies are either unintentionally or intentionally designed to serve the top and bottom and miss the place where your leverage is, right? This is where all of the leverage in the, it's also, by the way, when you think about college culture doesn't change from your green light people who do anything or your red light people who oppose everything. It changes in the middle. That's how you change a culture, is with the base of the organization, not with the early adopters or by convincing the red light people to come along. Same is true of students. You got all that leverage in the middle, and these are where these big ideas happen. And sure, students are learning. This is where you get to reclaim that liberal arts education. These are the 4 big ideas. There's a lot of material we can provide on you this to flesh this out. Talk briefly about planning. Essential conditions. This is long-scale change. It's not the trailer in the back of the campus. It cannot be the next acronym. We like to say this is a movement, not an initiative. A friend of mine, Ed Bowling, who ran the North Carolina cadre of Completion by Design, says, this is not something we're doing, it's something we're becoming. It's a different way of thinking about how to structure ourselves so students move through our institutions. You got to understand where you are and prepare for change. I think for your completion plans, you guys have already done the scale of adoption assessment from CCRC. We think that's really important to see where you are now on these 4 big ideas. And you got to commit to this for the long term. And by the way, on the outcomes, we think there's 2, I mentioned earlier I hated fall-to-fall retention. We think there's 2 things you can measure in the first year that are highly predictive of downstream success, and I think they've been started to woven into some discussions in Ohio. They are the percentage of students who pass transfer level math and English in the first year, and the percentage of students who accumulate, in the perfect world, 30 transferable units in the first year, but we tend to look at 20 or 24, so you got a number you can move and feel okay about, because if you look at 30, you're starting at like 10%. So unit accumulation, credit unit accumulation in the first year, passing transfer level math and English in the first year, which by the way, I point out, you can't pass transfer level math and English first year if you're in a 4-course sequence. And what we've learned nationally is extreme acceleration models with 2 courses, or even co-rec models like your friends down in Tennessee who have every student went into transfer level math and English in their first semester starting in fall 15. Now they put a required co-rec course around that, more units if you would have tested lower. And by the way, on the math side, 3/4 of those students are not in algebra. They're in quantitative reasoning or statistics. If you do those things, both of those acceleration models and co-rec models get about 60% of their students through transfer level math in the first year. Our rate at most of our colleges historically is below 20. We're tripling the rate with these models, and you might say it doesn't work for everyone. Yeah, it doesn't. 40% is still too high for it not to work for, but right now it's not working for 80%. So I'll take it not working for 40 before 80. So we do need to fold that type of reform into the conversation. But if you measure those 2 outcomes, you will predict downstream completion. I think I'm at the end of my time, and I know the one thing you do on a Friday is not keep people late. This was intentional to get to this point without having too much exploration of the depth of guided pathways. I know I have some meetings later today with some of you where we'll do that. I have no idea what Owens is going to do on guided pathways. I don't think this is something you've decided. What I would consider is this: to think about the problems of your students that you guys know day to day in their lives. What are they struggling with? What could getting through this institution to their goals mean for them? Go back to that slide from Georgia State in your head and say, if we could get 20 percentage points more of them through, those aren't points, they're people. How many people is that? Is it worth having these conversations and moving the needle on these structures to get to that goal? It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to take time. I will stay and answer questions with the mic, but anyone who's got to go, feel free to go. We were only supposed to be here till 11, and if it devolves into like things in the front, we can do that too. Anyone from the campus leadership want to talk about where this fits in with everything? They're all in the financial aid interview, trying to find out. In that case, I'll release you, but anyone who wants to stay can ask questions afterwards. Thank you guys very much for your time.